Welcome to Season 4 of the Empowering Women podcast, a production of the Empowering Women in Industry organization. Together, we will hear from ambitious and inspiring career women as they share their stories of success in overcoming career challenges. I'm Charlie Matthews, founder of Empowering Women, and I'm proud to introduce our host, Shannon Bumgarner from Femspire.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Empowering Women podcast. As we are recording this episode, it is May here in North Carolina, but it is starting to feel a lot like summer. And let me tell you, I wasn't really ready for it, but I guess I better get ready because summer, here we are. But what I was ready for is today's guest, who is Jacquie Abram. And you won't know this, but we are actually recording this episode on the heels of the Buffalo, New York tragedy, which just happened this past weekend. So it couldn't be better and unfortunately tragic timing. But Jacquie is the international best-selling author of Hush Money, How One Woman Proved Systemic Racism in Her Workplace and Kept Her Job. Jacquie is also a keynote speaker, and she has been featured in Forbes. Welcome, Jacquie, to the podcast. I am incredibly blessed to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be here, even though it is under such alarming circumstances.
Yeah, and we need your voice, Jacquie, now more than ever. And I just love your power that you're stepping into and staying in this space, which has to be a little bit tough right now.
Yes, it is very tough. But, one thing that I committed to when I decided to answer the calling to really use the pain that I've experienced in my own life and to turn it into power for others was that I would not be silenced no matter what's happening, because we do need to give a voice to the voiceless and to really share, what's happening in our lives and in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of your life and your community, as my listeners know, my favorite place to start the podcast is for my wonderful guest to share their story. So if you wouldn't mind, tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and
Absolutely.
your fascinating story.
Thank you so much. So once again, my name is Jacquie Abram. I am the author of this book, Hush Money, How One Woman Proved Systemic Racism in Her Workplace and Kept Her Job. But I'll tell you, Shannon, that as I continue to do these interviews, most people are actually surprised to find out that I'm not a writer. Writing was something I never, wanted to do. I never planned to do. I never thought I would be doing. And quite honestly, was really just the furthest thing from my mind, because I had a lucrative career in higher education that I was very, very good at. And let me just put emphasis on that. I was exceptional at my job. My background is in finance, so I'm a number cruncher. And in this position that I had and in this career that I had in higher education, I was making six figures. I was doing something that I really was good at and that I enjoyed. And it gave me a high enough income to not only provide for my family, which was critical because as a single parent of two girls, my income was the only income. And it actually allowed me to pay my bills comfortably, okay?
Right.
The career that I had, Shannon, by any measure, really should have been a successful career. But it wasn't. And the reason it wasn't is because, as I was building my career in higher education, which spanned nearly 2 decades, so you're talking about, almost 20 years, I kept finding myself becoming the repeated victim of racism in the workplace. And Shannon, not the kind that you see in a lot of the movies, the books and the TV shows, that tend to focus on racism from a long time ago, where it was done in the open. It was overt. It was easy to spot. You could point right at it and say, what I'm experiencing is racism because it was very obvious. It was very clear. That's not what happened to me. And that's not what happened to my daughters. And unfortunately, it's not what is happening to so many of our people. What I experienced in my career was, in my opinion, more sinister, okay? More nefarious because it was hidden. It was harder to prove. It was more covert. And because of that covert nature, you couldn't tell whether or not what you were experiencing was really racism. It damaged you psychologically, which is what happened to me. And it damaged me to the point, because of its sinister, nefarious nature, that I found myself suffering racial trauma as I'm trying to maintain my career. And that was so severe, Shannon. I actually considered homicide. I actually planned to kill my boss. And
Goodness.
when I couldn't figure out a way, because I was so psychologically damaged, when I couldn't figure out a way to kill my boss, I mean, think about that, to kill my boss.
Yeah, you were in such pain. You were just trying to figure out a way to stop the pain.
Exactly. And so then I found myself on the verge of suicide. And that just gives you some idea of the racial trauma that I suffered, as I was experiencing the most vile forms of racism in a place where I worked, a place where I should have been psychologically, emotionally, and physically safe. And so God ended up intervening and saved me from the day that I planned to kill myself by using my youngest daughter. And after that happened, and I just felt so broken, but I found strength in helping my daughter fight, who I found out was going through the same thing that I was going through in my job. Because Shannon, I don't know if you have children.
I do not, but I do advocate for younger women in STEM, so I'll try to make it that way, but It's not the same.
Well, let me tell you this. If you have children, anyone who's listening, you know that it's one thing if you come after me. But if you come after my children, you've got a problem on your hands. And so I was able to come out of myself long enough to help my child deal with her situation. And that's when I realized that I wasn't crazy, because the reason I found myself on the verge of suicide is I thought there was something wrong with me, that there was something wrong with Jacquie that was making these people, no matter where she went or what she did, want to harm her, and not just harm her, destroy me, decimate me to the point that I could not find gainful employment and maintain it, and could not recover. And so that's where my book came from. After realizing that I wasn't crazy, realizing that both my children were experiencing racism in their respective workplaces, and then actually reaching out to extended family and people in our community and finding out that 90% of the people, not only Black people, but people of color, they were experiencing the same thing that I was. And so it's one thing if you think that there's something wrong with you that you can't fix. But now, when I realized that there wasn't something wrong with me, there was something wrong with the system, okay?
Yep.
The system that allowed me to be harmed in this way. That's something I can focus on. And that was the spark that started this book.
Yep.
But as I mentioned, Shannon, I'm not a writer. My daughters are not writers. I'm a number cruncher.
I don't
But
know. We're going to get to that in a minute because I'm
yeah,
going to share a little bit of my own experience reading the book. So I'm not so
yes,
sure about that, Jackie. But I think what really, I guess, is so painful to hear you say, but I'm glad you're saying it, is that you thought the system was so sinister and deceptive in the way that it could hide racism that you really thought there was really something very specific wrong with you, to the point that it drove you to things that I'm sure if somebody would have asked you 5 years before that or 10 years before that, you would have thought to be unfathomable. Like, it pushed you that
yes,
far. It's so disturbing to think that the system is really that broken, but the reality is that it is that broken.
yes. It is absolutely that broken. And, I honestly, I wasn't prepared. And let me just put that a different way. I was woefully unprepared for what I experienced in corporate America. Um, the reason I was unprepared, quite honestly, is because they don't teach Black history in schools. And so
Mm,
growing up as a child and then as a teenager, the only history that I knew was what was being taught in school, which was not about me and my culture and where I came from. And so, like most people, I had these ideas of the American dream, that
mm,
if I put in the effort and the work, that I could actually obtain the American dream. And I did for a little while. You don't get to making six figures, because you're not qualified and capable,
right.
So I was able to get the jobs. I was quick to climb that corporate ladder. And sometimes it would be years that I could stay in this job because maybe the racists weren't there at the time that I was hired. But somewhere along the way, Shannon, a racist leader, someone who was in a
Mm,
position of power and influence, who maybe wasn't there when I started, but they were hired and they're there now and
yep.
they've noticed me.
I think as if you don't mind, I'm going to transition a little bit into the book because this really was, I guess, an aha moment for me and a
Mhm.
little bit of a scary one. So I'll be honest, I've been having trouble focusing and reading books these days. But what I want to tell the audience, and I will definitely put this in the show notes, please, please go pick up this book. I literally read this book in one day, and it was a Saturday, and I literally, Jackie, couldn't put it down.
Yes.
Um, it was so just for our audience's benefit, and I obviously am not going to give away the content here, but it's about a lady by the name of Ebony and the journey that she goes through in her career. And I'm getting back to Jackie, to your point about the change in leadership. So there were times when Ebony was hired or she moved to a different role within the organization that everything was, I'm going to call it fine, at least from what you could tell in the book. And then all of a sudden a leader transitioned out, or either their direct leader or another leader higher up the food chain, and pardon the language, but everything turned to hell pretty quickly. And
Yes.
so I think that I used to think in my younger career, why did leadership transitions matter? And as I've gotten more experience in the workplace, I've realized it, but I never looked at it from this lens. I looked more at it from objectives and career movement, but I had never looked at it through this lens. And it was super scary for me.
Yes. And it's scary for us because I'll just talk to you about me as a Black woman. When you are working in your position, you never get a chance to really just breathe. You are always operating in a state of hypervigilance
Mm,
because you know that someone can come along and notice you because you can't hide that you're Black. And if they notice you and they are a racist leader, okay, so I'm not talking about the coworker in the office next to me who doesn't like me.
Right.
I'm not talking about the colleague in another department who doesn't like me. I'm talking about the leader, Shannon, who is in a position of power and influence.
Yep.
They have the same biases as the people over here. But what makes them more dangerous is they have the authority, the power, and the influence to put actions behind their bias and kill your career the same way that racist police officers kill us in our community. The circumstances are very different, but the methods are exactly the same. Both
Well, I think what's
scenarios
really
end.
scary is in the book, it's multiple roads, meaning that
Yes.
Ebony takes a left and she's
Yes.
blocked.
Yes.
She gets smarter, so to say, in the book, and she
Mhm.
starts taking a right, and then she gets blocked that way. And it's just multiple rounds of, and even a specific leader, and I'm not going to share the name because I want our readers to read the book, our listeners to read the book.
Mhm.
Like, even to the point where the leader is no longer in his leadership role, he continues to make this character's life a living hell, which is
Yes.
just as insane to me that can still happen.
Yes. And that's exactly what we deal with. So, and it's one of the reasons we can't get comfortable. Oftentimes when we start positions, we don't put up, family pictures. We don't, bring plants and get comfortable because we know at a moment's notice, we can lose our jobs because we've been targeted and we have been effectively derailed from our careers. Because when a racist leader targets us, okay, we're not just up against them. They use their power and their influence to inspire others in the organization to conspire with them. And typically, one of those people that this leader has inspired to derail our career with them works in HR. And so they're all working together to create this unbearable environment to set us up, to make us fail. And we end up losing our sanity along the way and ultimately our careers.
Yeah, so that's another point. Again, I'm going to ask in a little bit, where did the book, I'm going to call it the book, come from, in terms of the character, because I think it might be an amalgam of some experiences that you've either had directly or people in your life have had. But what really this actually happens to listeners in the book. You really want to read this. So Ebony experiences where there's multiple people in her, I'm going to call it sphere of leadership and influence that are actually conspiring against her. And it's I'm going to call it, I don't like the word ally here, but I'm going to use that word, that help her figure out a little bit what's going on. Not completely, but just give her enough tidbit of information that she starts to, I'm going to call it, pivot her head a little bit to figure out what's going on.
So let me just clarify one thing for you and your audience.
Sure.
Everything that happened to Ebony, okay, all of the horrific events that she endured happened to a real woman. All of them just one. It's not a compilation of different things that happened to multiple people that were all put together, for dramatic effect. These things happened to one woman.
Oh, wow. Because that was my next question. Was it one person experience or was it multiple people's experience? Wow.
Yes. And
that's really troubling. Oh, my goodness.
And after we wrote this book, like I said, we were not writers. We didn't know what to do with it, didn't know how to market it. So I actually packed the books into the trunk of my car after we self-published because we could not get a publisher. And I actually paid $22 to have someone make this cover for me.
Okay.
And, so I packed the book in the trunk of my car, drove around and sold it at parks and at pop-up shops in my community. And Shannon, 7 months later, my book was an international best-selling and award-winning book. #1 on Goodreads for best eye-opening African-American women's fiction, recipient of the reader's favorite gold medal, featured in Forbes, and being read in so many countries around the world. And people were contacting me from so many countries and telling me that they were experiencing the same thing, which boggled my mind because I actually believed that racism was only a problem we had in America.
I have the same belief, but my eyes are being opened. So when we talked a little bit about this in the pre-call, and
Mm-hmm.
I could not believe it when you told me. I'm like, really? Unfortunately, I thought the U.S. had the corner on the racism market, but it appears
Yes.
that is not the case.
That is not the case. People from all over, from the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Ireland, Germany, Switzerland. Yeah, just all over the world. And they're reaching out to me and they're telling me that my book is their survival guide, their roadmap
Mm-hmm.
to fighting back against the racism that they're experiencing in their workplaces. And when I hear them tell me this, I just cannot tell you how therapeutic it is for me to know that the pain that I took and poured into this book with my daughters is someone else's power. This is their survival guide.
Yeah, that must feel really amazing to you. Not that you wanted to experience what you've experienced, but
Right.
it must feel really amazing to know that you've influenced. Are there any common questions or common themes that you could think of you would be willing to share with our audience that you've heard from your readers?
What I will tell you is something interesting. Okay. So there are a lot of countries that are reading my book right now, but I was contacted by, many Black people in Canada. And some of them told me that they have read my book. They have adopted the strategies that Ebony used because Ebony, as you know, she made a lot of mistakes along the way, but she was smart and she learned from those mistakes. And then she figured out the right way to fight back on that hidden covert level, just like they were attacking her on that covert level.
Yep.
And so these people in Canada, they were telling me that their employers were trolling their activity on LinkedIn because they did not want their employees reading my book. And if anyone showed support for me on LinkedIn, their employee or employers were using that to target them. So they were using my book to target employees who they could tell based on their LinkedIn activity were supporting what I was doing and actively engaged in the strategies that are identified in my book. And so that just, I cannot tell you how that made me feel to know that somewhere in this world there were some, I don't know who, I don't know how many, but that there were some employers who were using my book to target their employees. So that was probably the most interesting and disturbing thing that I've heard so far.
That is disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really links into one story that you tell in the book, which is about, and you mentioned Ebony's mistakes. This is the one that I recall the quickest, which is it's early on in her journey, and she decides to report something she's experienced anonymously.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think we've all been there. I currently work for a large employer, and there's obviously the normal ethics hotline. That's what I'll call it. And
Yes.
we're obviously encouraged to use that. but it never occurred to me that she accidentally gave away some of her power when she used that, and it actually ended up being used against her.
Yes.
Versus not. Anything you'd want to add there? Because I'm sure I didn't quite do it justice.
Well, a lot of employers say that, if you are being discriminated against, and you are not comfortable coming forward, that you can use their confidential anonymous hotline. And so at this particular company where Ebony worked, this was also the policy. And because the policy said that if you anonymously report the discrimination, that the parent company, okay, so there's a corporate office, would investigate it. She took that at face value and thought that she would be okay. So she anonymously reported the discrimination. And then she realized that not only did it improve the situation for her and the other Black woman who was working in the department with her at this college, it actually made matters worse because she suffered just the most horrific form of retaliation. And, Ebony, because she was under constant attack in her position, she found herself facing, three impossible choices. She tried to suffer in silence, but that didn't work. She considered resigning to save her sanity because she was experiencing trauma. She too had those homicidal thoughts.
Yep.
And
I remember that. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And fantasized about how she could kill her boss. And this is not uncommon for people who are experiencing this specific type of trauma. If you think about it, Shannon, when you are being discriminated against, they're attacking you, but their ultimate goal is to take away your livelihood, your ability to provide for your family, to provide for yourself. That does something horrible to you mentally when you realize I am seriously at risk of losing my ability to survive and to take care of my family. And so if you were to talk to other Black people who have experienced racial discrimination, 9 times out of 10, they will tell you, I had those same homicidal thoughts.
That just seems crazy to me. Like I'm just still, I'll be honest, Jackie, still trying to wrap my head around that just because I've never sat where Ebony is sat, right? Yes. So it's trying to figure out how to put myself in her shoes.
Yes.
Yep. How have you healed from the racial trauma you've been through? What does that look like for you or your daughters, if you're willing to share?
So honestly, as you can tell, I have not fully healed. However, I am a long way away from the woman who was standing on the edge of the ocean at a place called Salt Creek Beach in California, the day that I planned to commit suicide by drowning. I am light years away from that person. And I can finally say that I'm on a path to healing. As I mentioned earlier, I have turned my pain into power, and I am teaching others, not just Black people and not just people of color, but other people who are being marginalized and oppressed, how to fight back. Because the strategies that Ebony used to successfully turn the table on her employer and prove the racism that she was experiencing and keep her job, those same strategies work no matter what type of discrimination you are experiencing. And that's the other thing that is helping me heal, is that I'm helping so many people. And 50% of the people who buy my book are white. And I'm helping them too, because they're telling me that, they knew that racism existed.
Sure.
They wanted to help, but Shannon, sometimes they get discouraged because Black people and people of color don't want their help. They
And probably
say,
don't trust us. I mean, I
and
don't blame them,
don't,
right? I really
yes,
do not blame them at
and
all.
exactly. And so as a white person, that can be very discouraging because you want to do something, but you don't really understand it. And people are telling you you don't understand it. And so what my book does is it allows the white person who wants to put actions behind their allyship, but people are telling them, you don't get us, you don't understand us. It puts you into the shoes of a racial discrimination victim. And when you follow her 5-year journey and you come out of it, your eyes are opened. Your ideas about what we experience working while Black are forever changed. Would you agree?
I would agree. I think I would love to hear more feedback, but I think one of the things that I took away is what you can do as an ally is to help with, I'm gonna call it witnessing. That might be the bad word, or documentation, because it was one of my key takeaways of, if you're a Black woman in this case trying to work through this, documentation is key. And if you have people turning a blind eye or turning silent, then it's hard to get a full picture of the documentation of what has occurred.
Well, if you think about, you bring up a valid point, and if you think about what happened early on in Ebony's career, early on after she experienced, just a horrible, horrible treatment from the chancellor at this college.
Right.
And she was demoted and put into the student finance department, where she now knows that she reports to a racist. There's no doubt in her mind she's reporting to a racist. And the reason she knew it, clear as bell, where it wasn't as clear with the first person, the chancellor, but she knew in this case that she was definitely dealing with the racist, is because his actions were there for everyone to see. It was easy to spot. He's having team meetings and he's excluding the Black people in this department. They are left to man the office while the rest of them go into a team meeting. He's bringing in snacks and bringing them into his office for everyone to enjoy. And he's inviting people into his office to enjoy these snacks, except the Black people. So
Right.
the people that are benefiting from these snacks that he's bringing in, the people that are benefiting from the information that's being shared in these team meetings that they're being excluded from, they are aware that the Black people aren't here. And
Good point.
imagine how the dynamic might have changed, how the quality of work life for these Black people might have benefited if someone would have spoke up and said, don't you think we should invite those people in here? Don't you think they might enjoy some of these snacks? And just stood up and spoke up. It could
Yep.
have made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, it could have. And those are the small, I'm going to call it micro actions that we take that can
Yes.
make all the difference in the world. Are there anything else you'd like to point out to the audience that where we can, I'm going to call it white people because I'm going to pick on myself here, can help with these kind of situations in the workplace without being obtrusive or overstepping and understanding the mistrust?
So, the very first thing that you can do is understand what we are dealing with. It is not the easy to spot. It is covert. So, Shannon, let me just give your audience a deeper understanding of what covert racism looks like,
Okay,
okay?
perfect.
Okay. So, I'm going to give you, I'll give you 2 examples. So, the first one, I'm going to take a scenario. So, my book takes place in a for-profit college, okay?
Yep.
And with any college system, you are going to have multiple campuses. And because you have multiple campuses, you're going to be hiring duplicate roles. So each campus will have a receptionist. Each campus will have admissions administrators. Each campus will have directors. And so I'm going to use Director of Student Finance as my example position. If you work at a college or you are a college and you hire two directors of student finance, one is a white person and one is a Black person, and you pay this white person, $20,000 more a year than you pay this Black person, well, you could actually classify that as overt or covert, depending on whether or not this person knows that they're being underpaid by $20,000. Okay.
Right. Yep.
So employers who tolerate racism have gotten really smart. And they know that no matter how you classify that situation, at the end of the day, if an investigation were to ensue, payroll records could easily show that there is a pay gap, okay? There's no hiding the payroll records. It's going to show the pay gap. So even though there is still a pay gap, that gap is getting less and less. It's getting a little bit smaller. It's still there, but it's getting a little bit smaller. So instead, what employers who tolerate racism do is they discriminate against you, but in a hidden way. So same example, okay?
Okay.
You are a college. You've hired two directors. You've hired a white director of student finance and a Black director of student finance. For the white director of student finance, you are going to provide them with a stellar training, okay? You're going to give them a training that is so airtight. You're going to give them all the information they need, information that is vital to their success in their career, okay? You're going to give them all the tools they need to do the job that they're expected to do. There are going to be resources available to them if they run into any issues. There are resources that they have available. And if they need help or guidance for someone in leadership, there's going to be mentorship available. There's going to be people in a leadership role that look like them and can identify with what they are experiencing. Okay.
Yep.
So this white person is set up for success out of the gate. Now, the same person that trained the white person and set them up for success, well, now they've got to come over here and train the Black person. But guess what? They limit the information that is given to them, information that they know is vital to their success. And Shannon, in my case, not only did they limit the information that they gave me, but they intentionally gave me the wrong information. Okay.
Goodness.
They gave me the wrong information to steer me the wrong way, to make me make mistakes that they want me to make. Okay. So they're giving you the wrong information and limited information that they know is going to result in mistakes being made. But it doesn't stop there, Shannon. It doesn't stop there.
Oh, goodness.
In addition to that, okay, and to limiting your information and giving you the wrong information, they limit your tools. So remember, the white director has, great computer that runs well. They've got the right tools. Over here, we've got a computer that is slower than dirt. Okay. The internet might as well be dial-up because everything is freezing all day long. And where the white person has been given, high-speed internet, state-of-the-art computer, a printer in their office so that they can crank through their work all day long, quickly and efficiently, your computer's old, your internet speed is very slow, so everything's freezing. And you don't even have a printer in your office. You have to walk to the other side of the building every time you need to pick up what you've printed. So because of that, you're not able to produce the amount of work that this person is producing, and they're documenting your inability to produce the same amount of work and to get your work done, as well as documenting the mistakes that you're making. There are no resources available for you if you run into trouble because you're telling people that you cannot get your work done because your equipment is subpar, and the cries that you are making about your tools are falling on deaf ears because they are saying you're making excuses. There's
Right.
no resources. And when you try to talk to someone in a leadership position who understands what you are going through because you feel like you're experiencing discrimination, there's no one in a leadership position who looks like you and can identify with what you are experiencing, because guess what? You're it. You are the only Black person on the leadership team. And so when you have all of these obstacles that are put in place for you, and it is no wonder you are failing at this position, because you were set up to fail right out of the gate. And they are using the documentation that they've collected on you to justify letting you go or demoting you. And it is very hard for you to prove that you were set up to fail right out of the gate, because what I just described doesn't easily fit into the discrimination bucket as defined by the EEOC. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's also not easily auditable either, to your
Yes.
point on the pay versus what you just described. What
Yes.
you just described is a much worse, sinister version of what I've heard called the glass cliff.
Mm-hmm.
So for our listeners who are not familiar with that terminology, it really is when, I'm just going to put it, a marginalized person. It could be female, and it, depending on the industry, it could be person of color, it could be LGBTQ, is generally, the way I've heard it, is more in a position of power, and they're placed into that position of power, but not given the resources and considerations of someone who would be a white male. And they're often put in a tough situation. So one example would be if you're put into like a C-suite in a company, let's say you're a Black female CEO, and you're not given those resources, and you've stepped into what I'm going to call a turnaround situation. So you have the double whammy. And then honestly, the company wins either way, because if the diversity person does in fact manage to succeed, then they can say, yay, look at us. And then if that person, understandably doesn't succeed, then they can say, oh, well, we tried.
Exactly. The employer, they say basically, we are all about diversity. We gave this Black person or this person of color a chance. It's not our fault. Okay. It's
Yep.
not our fault they weren't the right fit, because we gave them this position. We gave them a decent salary. It's not our fault they couldn't get their job done. This person over here is able to get their job done.
Yep. Yeah. And it's a
Yes.
very sinister, covert, to your point,
Yes.
way of handling it. Yep.
Yes, and when you lose your position or you are demoted, you literally have no idea what happened to you. And that is where the sinister part comes into play, because many of our people are losing their positions, but not really fully understanding how.
Yeah. I think one of the things I'm learning, Jackie, through my very baby steps into understanding systemic racism is that I always knew there was a huge bigotry element to it. But what I never really connected the dots on until the last couple of months is that it's really all about power and oppression. There's
Yes.
certainly bigotry, and that part's very ugly. But really, the center of it all is power, power and oppression.
Yes. And, I promised you I would give you two examples. So that's one example.
Okay, perfect.
The other example, Shannon, I passionately refer to as the Black workhorse. And so I'm going to use my same example that I used with the for-profit college, which is right out of my book, and the director of student finance position. So, as I already mentioned, employers who tolerate racism, they have learned to target you, but in a hidden, covert way that you cannot prove it. So, one of the ways that they are targeting Black people and people of color is by using the job description. So, here's your job description, Shannon, okay? And on any job description, there are bulleted listed items of the expectations that this company has for you of the job that you're going to perform. So, Shannon, here is your list of duties, okay? I want you to pay really close attention, Shannon, to all these duties that we expect you to perform, and especially the last bullet that says you're going to do these duties and all other duties as assigned.
Oh, I hate that bullet.
Yes, yes. And so now you are in your job and you are the Black person who is working in this job. But as the months go by, Shannon, you're noticing something. You're noticing that in addition to these items that are listed in your job description, you've now got these extra duties that have been added to your plate, these extra duties that have been added, these extra duties that have been added. And before you know it, you are doing the job of 2, 3, sometimes 4 people. And your workload is so heavy, you are about to drop to your knees or your back is going to break, and you are finding yourself working, 70, 80 hours a week trying to keep up with this workload. You're not getting paid anything extra to do all of this extra work. And so you are working late nights, you are working during your lunch, you are working on Saturdays and on Sundays to try to keep up with this workload that no human can possibly keep up with, because to the employer, you are not human. You are dehumanized. The employer is going to get their money's worth out of you because to them, you are a workhorse who is designed because of who you are to be able to work harder, carry bigger loads, and do more because you are born and bred that way, because you're not human. You are a workhorse.
I've never made that connection. That's, to take a sec. Sorry. That's just, wow. And then if you compound that with the first example that you gave of not being given, I'm going to call it resources, to use a generic term.
Right.
And then to me, if you compound that with maybe a personal situation where you might be I'm going to call it single breadwinner of the household, no matter what your circumstances, then you live in an element of fear because you know that you have to pay the bills. So you're willing to work that 70, 80 hours a week because you are fearful of not having that income.
Yes. And for you, there is no such thing as work-life balance, because these extra duties that have been piled upon you, they are now part of the expectations this company has for you. And if you don't produce the amount of work that they expect you to produce, then you are subject to losing your position. And many of us cannot afford to do that.
Yep. Well, Jackie, you're definitely turning the pain of what you've shared with our listeners and with me today into an amazing powerhouse. You are a full-on powerhouse. But I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you actually have a sequel coming to Hush Money. Do you mind sharing details about it's either just been released or is going to be released soon? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so the sequel was actually released in January. The sequel is called Hush Money: The Cost of Being Black in Corporate America.
Okay.
And it literally picks up right where this book left off.
Okay.
And it tells a very provocative, horrifying story, because racism is not a one-time thing for us. we're Black over here, and if we go to another company or we continue in our jobs, guess what? We're
Right.
still Black. And so even though Ebony was able to prove systemic racism in her workplace and keep her jobs, her problems with racism didn't end there. But in addition to that, she encounters the other isms that form a toxic combination of horrific abuse. Because in addition to racism, there's colorism, there's sexism. And so when you read book 1, you are definitely going to want book 2. And right now, Hush Money book 1, the Kindle version, is only $5 on Amazon. And that's USD for Mental Health Awareness Month. So it's only going to be $5 for a couple of more days. So it's a great time to get book 1 at the discounted price. But don't make the mistake that one woman made who had me, just kind of laughing out loud. She decided that she wanted to read Hush Money book 1, Shannon. And she said, I'm not sure if I'm going to like this book. So I will read book 1, and then if I like it, I will order book 2. So she sent me a message on LinkedIn, and she said, I am kicking myself for not buying book 2 because I'm stalking the Amazon man, waiting for him to bring me my second book. I need to know what happened. So don't be like her and stalk the Amazon driver.
Oh, I'm going to be stalking him. So am I correct in understanding that it's also on Amazon? Because for some reason I didn't find it when I bought the first book. It's also on Amazon. Okay.
It's definitely on Amazon. It's Hush Money, The Cost of Being Black in Corporate America.
Okay. Well, and Amazon guy, you better watch it because I'm going to order it.
Yes, and I would hold it up, but someone ordered my last autographed book.
Okay, so, there you go.
It's a really great story, and the books go together, and you will not be able to put book 2 down either.
Okay. Well, I better save that for Saturday when I'm ready to go.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
I know it's hard to believe this time has gone by so quickly, and I just feel so blessed to be in your presence. Are there any final words of advice or wisdom that you would love to share with our audience?
Absolutely. So if you are someone who is currently experiencing racial discrimination, you definitely want to get this book.
Yep.
This is your roadmap. This is your survival guide. There is a reason this book is spreading around the world like wildfire, and it's going to teach you things that you never imagined you could do to fight back, and not just fight back, but survive the battle, win the war, and keep your job if you so desire. And if you are an employer or an organization and you want to look within and actually change the culture in your own organization, this is the book to put in front of your leadership team. I work with a lot of organizations, and what they do is they actually give this book to their leadership team. They read 2 or 3 chapters at a time, and then they have a healthy discussion. It actually opens up your eyes in terms of what covert, hidden racism looks like. And it gives you that healthy discussion to ask, what would you do if you saw this happening? How would you feel if this was happening to someone close to you? And it really just provides a way for people to step into the shoes and see and feel modern day racism in a real way. And if you are an ally, okay, someone who wants to help but doesn't really know what to do, this is going to help you get that deeper understanding that you're looking for, so you can also see the hidden aspects of what we experience working while Black. And it's going to empower you in ways that you could not imagine. I said that I was self-published. I couldn't find a publisher. I sold this book from the trunk of my car. It's available on Amazon. But if you want to get an autographed book, or you just want to have a conversation with me, I am most active on LinkedIn. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn, you are guaranteed a response.
And she's fantastic. If you couldn't tell that in our last about an hour conversation, she is Jacquie. I'm just incredibly in awe of just who you are and what you've been able to navigate through. So from every part of me, I just want to say thank you so much for being willing to spend time with me on the prep call. And just being really vulnerable today on what is a very difficult day for you.
Yes.
So thank you just for working through the pain and for showing up today.
Thank
I
you
really
so
just
much.
genuinely do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
So, audience, this is one of those episodes I know that you need to hear. It's not as peppy as many of them, but I think it's very inspirational. Please go buy the book. Go buy Hush Money. You will want to read it. And apparently you're going to run and read both. I'm going to order my second copy right now. And I'm going to chase the Amazon guy down the driveway. So thank you so much, Jacquie, for joining us. I look forward to staying connected and to supporting you and all that you're doing on LinkedIn. So to my audience, I will talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.